Welcome back once again, gang, for the fourth and final installment in our Chapter 12 lecture series. This section is entitled The Origins of Feminism. The focus question for this section is, what were the diverse sources of the antebellum women's rights movement and its significance? Really, at the core of all of these early reform movements were the activities and actions of American women. The grassroots strength of abolitionism in particular came from women. The public sphere was more open to women's involvement than it was to women's involvement in government and party politics. Women could not vote, but they could definitely circulate petitions, attend meetings, march in parades, speak in public, and really any activity within that public sphere short of actual direct participation in government itself. A generation of women became involved in various reforms: the temperance movement, the abolition movement, asylums, anti-prostitution movements, and many more. All really were spearheaded and led to a large degree by American women. Participation by women in these various reform movements, particularly abolition, served as an inspiration to the early movement for women's rights in general. The Grimke Sisters, which are the two ladies you see right here, took outrage over public speaking as a springboard to argue for more rights. The Grimke Sisters were daughters of a South Carolina slaveholder in Charleston who became militant abolitionists through their own experiences directly with the institution of slavery in South Carolina. And they eventually moved to the North, where they became very involved and, in fact, prominent leaders and speakers in the abolition movement. However, male criticism of their public speaking activities led them to advocate for greater women's rights and equality for women in all spheres. Slowly, gradually, but inevitably, out of the same sort of impulses that undergirded the general reform movement, women advocated for more and more rights and participation in American society. Women demanded to be able to participate more fully in the market revolution. Women's advocates such as Sojourner Truth, who was also herself a former slave, insisted the movement should devote more attention to the plight of the poor and the working class women. People such as Amelia Bloom and others insisted on dress reform to liberate women from the confinement of traditional women's dress and allow them to dress in more comfortable and arguably more fashionable modes. And in fact, her last name Bloom gave rise to the term bloomers, which was a term for female pants that were worn in the era, as illustrated in this illustration right here, which was a radical departure from traditional gender norms. The whole idea of women wearing pants was scandalous in the minds of many Americans at the time. Directly inspired by the language and the rhetoric of the abolition movement, the women's rights movement also used the language of slavery to describe women's own plight within American society. Slavery was directly compared to the subjugation of women in marriage and the complete removal of any sorts of social or economic rights that came along with the institution of marriage for women. Feminists particularly criticized the lack of property rights and equated that directly with slavery in their rhetorics around women's rights and women's liberation in this era. The women's rights movement also ventured into other areas regarding women's place in American society and included such things as the concept of social freedom for women, the turning of a popular understanding of freedom, self-ownership in a new direction. Under this idea of women's social freedom, women were free to choose their own sexual activity and procreation, and that women were meant to be free from the threat of spousal violence. Now, differing ideas of womanhood did coexist in early feminist thought, and there were some early feminists who more closely aligned to the more typical male-female social dynamic than others who proposed even more radical departures from that dynamic. The greater role for women remained extremely controversial in this era. The abolitionist movement in particular split in 1840 over women's participation and leadership, as the male leaders of the movement balked at the increasing power and influence of some of the women leaders of that movement and sought to minimize their presence in the overall national movement. They even formed a new political party, the Liberty Party, which was formed by those who believed that men should form the leadership of the movement and that abolitionism should be turned into a political party. And it was really this moment right here, this schism within the abolition movement, that fully gave birth to the women's rights movement in the mid-19th century as a distinct movement in its own right. Alright, gang, we've reached the end of our Chapter 12 lecture series for your textbook, Give Me Liberty by Dr. Eric Foner. As always, study hard, and I'll see you soon.